Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Mikale Olson. And in this conversation, we talk about unity on the right and his take on the phenomenon of increasing radicalization and how he thinks we should navigate unity or working together to defeat a common enemy, an enemy that is openly murderous towards people who are not on board with that enemy's belief system. You can call it the left or progressivism. Even naming it is difficult because we're already establishing a friend-enemy distinction, and that distinction leads to certain assumptions about what other people's motivations are and how to get along with them, or how to ascertain whether or not getting along is even possible. And Mikale centers his algorithm of friend and enemy on his Christian faith. And we get into that. He's a great guy. You can find his YouTube channel and Twitter linked in the description, as well as links to support this channel. Without further ado, here is Mikale Olson. So the internet's erupting over various things, as the internet tends to do. And,
it does, yes.
I think it's probably about two major blow-ups per month, seems like. Maybe more, maybe less. But
maybe one a week, I feel like lately. It's been pretty wild.
Yeah, there's high tide. And then when there's a slow news day, then people make hay out of something that's probably not worth destroying or reforming political alliances over, but we can't help it. It's so dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you grow up basically immersed in the internet?
Not really. So I'm 30, when I was in high school, I didn't really have, I think I had a Facebook account in high school and that was it. And I never used it. I wasn't really on social media even that much up until probably like 2020 is when I really started to hop on and engage with what was going on.
What would happen in 2020 that would make you want to go online?
Oh, I don't know. Just something was going on in the world at the time. And I just, no. So it's been definitely the COVID thing kind of tipped me over the edge. Before that, I think I had an Instagram account before that. I might have had an old Twitter. I don't even remember. If I did, I never used it, and it might still be out there somewhere in the ether. Mm-hmm. But yeah, as soon as that happened, I started to hop on more. I think a lot of people did at that time just because everything was shut down and everyone was like, what the hell's going on? Mm-hmm. And, but before that, that's when I really started to pay attention more, certainly politically. Before that, I've always kind of had an interest in politics, but tried to distance myself from it as much as I could in a way without, with retaining the beliefs that I had, just because it was, so everything can be so divisive and it's so, I don't know. It can mess with your head, I guess, which I'm certainly discovering now. Mm-hmm. I have to set clear boundaries between, my personal life and the things that I'm interested in and my hobbies and my family and friends and what's going on the internet. So, but yeah, I would say probably for a good five years now, I've been really in tune and paying attention. So, and I've seen the landscape, which we'll probably get into this, with this whole topic today of unity and who should we unify with and all that. I've seen the landscape completely shift even in these last 4 or 5 years. It's been really weird. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
Where did you begin then 5 years ago, if you had a position?
I've always been more conservative. Yeah, I've always been more Christian conservative. So I was never on the left. I know a lot of people. Where were you or where are you now? Where were you back then? Because I remember, where are you now? That's the question. Right now, I'm even like, I don't know if I fit into whether it's the MAGA coalition. I'm definitely not on the left, but now I look at this MAGA coalition, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know anymore. Mm-hmm. So I'm feeling pretty politically homeless lately in many ways.
Oh, okay. But you were a conservative then?
Always conservative, but, I've always had my issues with the Republican Party. I've never been like a card-carrying, I'm a Republican. I've never been that guy. Yeah. So even with Trump, I've always had criticisms of him, even though I voted for him a few times.
What do you think the backbone of your political philosophy is then?
My Christian theology, for sure. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, but because that could go either way. That could go from monarchism to full-blown communism.
Yeah, no, right? So I was raised in very, Christian home. My dad's he's got a PhD, a seminary PhD degree from Southern Seminary. I think it's in just biblical theology. I think he has another degree. I think it's a master's degree in counseling, biblical counseling. So I've always grown up around that. My dad was a Christian school teacher at a high school. He does that currently. He's been that since I was, since I can remember. And so I've grown up in a very theologically informed environment. Family members are pastors. I have another uncle who is a PhD guy, a seminary degree from Nottingham in England. So I've kind of I always describe my background as, when people ask, I hear like Mikale Peterson, for example, talk about growing up with Jordan Peterson and hearing constant theological or political discussions around the dinner table. That's kind of how it was in my house. So that's definitely the formation of where I'm at.
Would you say
which I'm thankful for.
Are there many people of your age range in the circles, the real life circles that you circulate it within?
Yeah. I'd say a growing amount too.
Yeah.
So like, you see all these statistics of people going back to church, younger generations, where I'm definitely seeing that at the church that I'm at. I have a good group of friends that are, very informed with this kind of stuff. They're more so theologically than politically, but I'd say there's definitely a good number of younger people, which is I think it's great. I think it's great to see that overall, which obviously there can be ditches to that, as we're saying.
Yeah.
But
well, I guess as somebody who grew up in the church, maybe you have a read or maybe you don't have a read on why people of your generation are turning toward the church or what they're finding in the church.
Probably order, structure, things, meaning in life. I think that, I think there's kind of two camps. There's people that are turning to church for political reasons exclusively, and they're really just looking for structure that the current, I guess we'll say the word secular environment isn't giving them. And so they're looking for that. We've become so divorced from law and order. We've become so divorced from any real objective meaning in life is really what it comes down to. And I think religion in general, or spirituality in general, is becoming more popular because of that. It's people are searching for meaning.
Yeah.
We've been fed the Darwinistic worldview for so long, and I think people are kind of realizing, okay, that was fun while it lasted, but we're miserable and we're depressed and we're on all these pharmaceutical products and they're not doing the job. And so I think people are like, they're searching for meaning is really what it comes down to. And I think it's in particular, you see a lot of people being pushed towards Catholicism or even Eastern Orthodoxy, these more rigid kind of high church structured environments. I think that has less to do with like pursuing a relationship with God and pursuing Jesus versus, pursuing that sense of order and structure, because they really do have that allure to them. Speaking of the Roman Catholic Church, where it's like, we're the rigid thing that's never changed for 2,000 years. We'll give you all the order and structure that you're looking for. Just submit to our system. And I think that's a lot of what it is. So,
well, it's not just a system, it's an entire world. You can live out your entire life. It makes sense of all the things. If you look at how progressivism has progressed, it has basically turned into a high church of itself. Specifically, I'm thinking of all the different holidays. They have a saint. Every day has like a new trans saint or a different minority saint. So they're reconstructing some sort of liturgical calendar and liturgical rites and liturgical liturgies with these land acknowledgements that now seem to be actually coming into effect in Canada. If I read that story correctly, the Canadian government is now
about that.
Taking those land acknowledgements as actually ceding the land that you live on to these tribes that arguably no longer exist. But
Oh, I was just going to say, you're right. It's like a fundamentalist religion in and of itself. And sorry, what were you going to say?
No. So when people go back seeking order, it's kind of, it can be the case that converts are the more fundamentalist of all members. Fundamentalist is probably not the right word. Not radical either, but the more gung-ho, there's a word I'm looking for, the more...
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying.
On fire for that. So there needs to be an attendant mentorship structure to onboard all these people and to make these systems make sense. And Jordan Peterson did pretty good at introducing the topic of religion as something that can be intellectually viable for a certain contingent of specifically young adult males. They're like, okay, well, atheism has a bunch of thoughts in it, but where's the meaning? Christianity, religion has a lot of meaning, but where's the structure in that? So I see there's a lot of tug of war on the right or the not left over these identities that are being dusted off and pulled out of the closet, so to speak.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I think that's where that interlap between the political reasoning why people would want to adopt more, Christian religious, they'll join the Catholic Church, they'll join the Eastern Orthodox Church, they'll join certain Reformed, Protestant Reformed denominations that are more of that kind of structured, rigid. I think that you see, this is where you see that overlap between the political and the religious, where it's like, so how I don't know how familiar you are with Christian theology in general, but um, you know, at least from my understanding and how I grew up and what I believe, you pursue religion not for religion's sake. You don't pursue religion for order sake alone. You pursue religion and you participate in it, whether it's going to church, church membership, taking communion, baptism, whatever it is, all these different, as the Catholic Church calls it, sacraments. We'll use that. We'll use the fancy word. You engage with these things. You submit yourself to the leadership of a church, a pastor, a bishop, etc., not to just be a part of something or to have order in and of itself, but to deepen your affection for God, right? So, but what I'm seeing with a lot of people is they're not pursuing this stuff because they actually want to deepen their affection for God, or because they really have an affection at all. It's again, it goes back to that they just want someone to tell them what to do. They want order and structure, and they want something to follow. And our secularized culture has completely abandoned them on that front. And so people, as a result, are being taken advantage, I think, of people who are posing as Christian, which is what I think a lot of these woke right adjacent people are doing. They're kind of masquerading as Christian, but they have no intent of really leading people into a relationship with God, into deepening people's affection for God. It's just about using Christianity to lead people down a path that will lead them to their radicalized political identity. Is ultimately what it's like. Something, it's like a means to an end, in other words. So. Yeah.
How do you know? How can
How
you
do I know
tell?
that's happening?
Yeah, how does one tell the false
Well,
prophet from the true?
that is a great question. Well, biblically speaking, I think first and foremost, we're supposed to be focused on the great, like this is phrase, the Great Commission, right? This is Jesus's final words to us before he ascended. And this is, go and preach the gospel to all nations, baptizing them, teaching them all that I've commanded. And people that have divorced themselves from that. So, for example, you'll see a lot of people like Joel Webbin, for example, or some of these hyper reformed guys in this Christian nationalist orbit. They hardly ever talk about evangelism. They hardly ever talk about our need for a savior. They hardly ever talk about our deepening affections for God or any of these things, which is what the gospel is all about in the first place. It's all about it's like political themes that relate to our culture, and then they use and they twist Christian theology to fit those particular political themes. And you just see that over and over and over again. And so I think the best way for people, speaking to Christians, the best way to decipher a false prophet from a true prophet is to use that word. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but people that are teaching rightly versus not teaching rightly is to constantly be studying the scriptures. What does the Bible tell us about? What does the Bible tell us about government? How does the Bible tell us a government should operate? What does the Bible tell us about our engagement in the public square? These types of things. And these are conversations that are getting completely covered over by a lot of this nonsense radical political ideology that's kind of divorced. Like, for example, the book, did you read that book, Case for Christian Nationalism by Stephen Wolfe?
I have
Did you ever
not
read that
yet.
one?
No, no.
So if you read that book, and this was a big criticism he got, it's called Christian nationalism, but there's hardly any biblical arguments for his positions in the entire book. It's almost all political philosophy that's kind of divorced from a biblical argument. And I've heard him address this on certain podcasts where he'll say, well, the biblical arguments are implied. Well, that's the thing. They're not. That's exactly what a lot of Christians have questions over is how did you arrive at your certain political philosophy? and he's kind of gearing into kinism and some of this stuff. How did you get there from the Bible? How did you actually get there?
Kinism?
And
Did I hear
so
that
this is,
right?
yeah. So like this belief that, God ordered the nations based on races, and each nation should be primarily one race of people. And you'll hear him, he's tweeted things like interracial marriage as a result is mostly sinful. Most of the time it's sinful. So they'll
Hmm.
say things like that because they think it's like this moral imperative that we have to preserve your kin or preserve your race based on national lines. And so to
Hmm.
marry someone of another race, like that goes against that moral imperative. But the problem is that moral imperative just simply is not found in scripture. So if he's going to call it Christian nationalism, you have to contend with the Christian part of it. You know what I
Wait,
mean?
uh,
So
what, I mean, if we look at the Bible, it's for the Israel nation, the nation of Israel, not the modern one, but there's pretty strict strictures around who you can marry, and it does have to do with clanship, and
so are you talking
does it
about the
not?
Old Testament where
Yeah.
there was rules about not marrying people of other nations?
Is there not
So that's in
a
there, but
threat
that
of?
has nothing to do with race. That has to do with religion. So it was about not marrying, like for example, the Israelites, Canaanites who had a pagan demon
Okay.
worshiping religion. Don't go marry them and bring
Hmm.
your religion, in other words, into the nation. So it had
Hmm.
nothing to do with like racial purity. I think that's a common misconception. I mean,
Hmm.
even like the Old Testament Israel was not racially pure. You don't see that emphasized in the Old Testament at all. I
Yeah.
mean, even in the story of the Exodus with Moses, it distinctively says that they left Exodus. Speaking of the Israeli nation, the Jewish nation, they left as a mixed multitude, and there were
Okay.
Egyptian, there were tons of Egyptians that left Israel, left the pagan gods of Israel, or sorry, left Egypt, left the pagan gods of Egypt, wanted to follow Yahweh, wanted to follow the God of the Old Testament, and so they were grafted into the nation of Israel, despite their racial impurity, I guess you could say.
Okay.
I mean, even Jesus's lineage himself, there's people that are not Jewish, like Ruth or others
Okay.
that are not
But there
Jews.
is an
So that
emphasis on inheritance and on who your father is, and the father's before
um
them.
yes, but I don't think that's a that it the race isn't the race. I don't think is what matters there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
But can it be the case that it goes too far in the multicultural direction? I mean, just for the realism of politics,
Yeah.
we do know that the more diverse ethnically and culturally a people are, the less trust there is, or the more homogenous they are, the more trust there is. So there
I
is a
think,
reality to, I don't know about race, but kinship,
yeah. So
similarity,
I think that
just how we work as human beings,
yeah,
monkeys that we are.
I think that, and there's that distinction between like ethnic nationalism or propositional nationalism. I'm sure you've seen those
Mm,
conversations.
mm-hmm.
Joel Berry is someone that brings that up a lot, which I think he's correct about. Where um, I think, like in other words, your race doesn't inherently dictate what you believe. And I think a lot of people in the more far right, the kinist right, people like Stephen Wolf or others kind of
Mm,
assume that. Some of them just explicitly outright say that. People like Corey Mauler or others, they have just gone full on, you know,
mm,
your race is your identity. Your race is inherently tied to your moral worth or your
mm,
ability to do good or right. And
mm,
some races have less of a ability to do that than others. And a lot of these people will put Jews at the bottom of that totem pole. Um, and
mm,
so, which is just it's that in that's a whole conversation in and of itself. That's crazy to me, especially people claiming to be Christians that are saying that. So, but
mm,
I do think there's something to what you're saying where like multiculturalism, as far as I think having, as far as multi-propositionalism, I guess you could say,
mm.
I think that can be problematic. And I think that is problematic. I think that's what we're seeing now, where it's
Yeah.
less about adopting different races and having a bunch of different people of different races live next to each other versus having a bunch of people who have like fundamentally different values and
Yes.
propositions about life itself. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's the more interesting for me. The more interesting quandaries, because it seems to be that's the more pressing matter.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what is called, or used to be called, the culture war. I guess people use that
Yeah.
phrase, but I haven't heard it a lot lately. It's really about deciding which set of values is going to be the dominant set of values. So insofar as Christian nationalism is concerned with preserving a set of values that are consistent through history, I think that that could be a good thing for America being founded, at least. What would you
I
consider
would
the
agree with that.
American as a Christian nation?
Yeah, I think,
And if we stray too far
yeah,
from Christianity, are we still America?
no, I would agree
No,
with what you're saying. Yeah,
really. Okay.
yeah.
So how do we
So,
preserve that? That's the question then, and that's
right.
why a lot of the perhaps wasted, perhaps not wasted energy about inter-right or inter-not left, specifically not left fighting over, who is allowed which values, which virtues, because it is a tug of war to kind of claim that moral high ground or
Mhm.
the ability to lead and to declare what virtue is the standard.
Yeah, so it seems to be a fight over power in order to impose that virtue in a way. Um, the problem is a lot of the
Hmm.
people that are grabbing for power aren't actually holding to biblical virtue. So this is my critique of the a lot of these and Christian nationalism. This can be like a word concept fallacy where there's like 100 different definitions depending on who you ask, and like the way Stephen Wolfe or Joel Webben or some of these other people would claim the word Christian nationalism, I wouldn't agree with them on that. The way that somebody like Joel Berry would claim the word Christian nationalism, I would agree with that. So, but they're kind of using the same word, but they're two completely different definitions of what that actually entails and means. I actually made a video on my YouTube channel, kind of walking through three possible definitions of that. But
Okay.
um, yeah, my problem with a lot of the people that are claiming the term Christian nationalism the loudest, which would be more of these like kind of alt-right kinist groups in many ways, is that's just not Christian. So the values that they would impose in the name of Christianity would not actually be Christian values, but they're calling themselves Christian nationalists. So there's like
Hmm.
kind of this. That's why every time I talk about this group and I post about it on Twitter, I'll put the word Christian in quotations because it's like not really I don't think a biblical mandate, the things that they're presenting to us as
Hmm.
what should be enforced and what value should be imposed and things like this. It goes far beyond what anything the Bible prescribes, namely this kinist idea. Um, and so, yeah, it just depends on what you mean by the term. But I do agree with you that, I mean, it's like what James Madison said. There's a famous quote where he talks about that, our constitutional, and I'm going to butcher this quote. I'm not quoting it verbatim. This is just a
It's created
paraphrase,
for
but
moral, upright people.
yeah. And so he's talking about a Christian people,
Yeah.
one could argue. And so,
It's wholly
it doesn't
unsuited
mean
to
everybody in the
immoral people.
country has to
Yeah.
be like forced to be a Christian, which some of these people believe that like the government should have the authority under a Christian monarch to force everybody to be a Christian, at least outwardly speaking, attend church forcefully, things like that, in order
Hmm.
to remain a citizen. Like there's some people that are arguing that. People like David Reese has argued that, Joel Webb and other people.
Hmm.
It's just like that's not Christian. So that's how Islam spreads. That's not how Christianity spreads. And
Well,
so
I guess it was Christian until a certain point. Perhaps in the
I,
medieval era, if you didn't go to church, there was something wrong with you, right? It was just something
I
built
think
in
I
to
think there's a lot of people.
life.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of people throughout the Middle Ages who have done that in the name of Christianity. But when I say it's not Christian, I don't mean that Christians haven't done that in history. I
Okay.
mean that
Yeah.
this isn't consistent with the biblical text or early apostolic first, second, third century Christianity.
Hmm.
So we've
Well,
kind
that
of
was a
there's been
different beast than when Christianity took over the Holy Roman Empire, which the quote is, it's neither Roman nor holy, but when
yeah.
it wasn't the ascendant dominant religious ideology, it didn't need to spread. It couldn't spread by imposition, but once it was, it did.
Yeah. And I think that was an error. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So um, I think the trend that we see, when you study early church history, starting in the book of Acts, you see the gospel being spread not through, the sword or through force or coercion or government mandate or power, but through the Great Commission, what I mentioned before, is preaching
Hmm.
the gospel to people, suffering willingly for the cause of Christ, and bearing witness to Christ in those ways. And that in and of itself had this like massive cultural pre-political um, almost power over the Roman Empire, to where it became so popular just from that alone that you could argue historically that the Roman Empire was almost forced to adopt this. From Constantine's the one that made it legal, and then what was it, like 70 years later or something, it became the official state religion under another emperor. And with the Edict of Milan was Constantine. I forget what the other one was called, but you could argue that was a political move on part of the Roman Empire because of how politically popular Christianity became, because of just the simple, faithful witness of Christians, even amidst political persecution, suffering, all this stuff. And so it kind of, as far as how do you get like speaking of the United States, how do you get a country to adopt those values again and to retain its identity as a result, like what we once were, you could argue? I don't think a government is going to be able to legislate that. I actually think that's going to do exactly what it did in the in the medieval times. It just creates a culture of darkness in a way. It creates a culture of spiritually dead people that are going through the motions, but it's not going to last. It creates a culture of spiritual rebellion against God in many ways. And I don't think that's the proper solution or the biblical solution.
But what would, and I think what sparked me to reach out to you was a very well worded tweet about the real work of Christian nationalism is preaching the gospel and opening people and I guess discipling people along the Christian path. But if it does trickle up, how would we know, or what would it look like? So if you do want some sort of Christianity in government, how would it manifest itself?
I think that's a great question. I think the original American experiment, the constitutional order, I think is the closest we've gotten in human history to that. It's not perfect, but I think that's pretty close, where it acknowledges, the sinful proclivity of man in power. That's why there's the separation of powers. It acknowledges the rule of law. It acknowledges that God is above the government. He's the one that gives us our laws, not only our laws, but our rights. It acknowledges the Imago Dei, that we're all created in the image of God, which I think is the best argument against a lot of this kind of neo-Nazi adjacent stuff that's emerging on the right. It goes back to first principles at the end of the day. And so you see all of that within our founding documents explicitly acknowledged. And and it also acknowledges the role of government to enforce what some people call the second table of the law, which is how we treat each other. This would be like the second half of the 10 Commandments. Don't steal, don't murder, all of these kinds of things. And this is kind of what our common law, you could say, is predicated on. It's kind of Augustine's city of God vision come to life in many ways. So I think that's what it would look like, just practically speaking. I think when you see a population largely in a genuine sense convert to Christianity, you'll see the government itself start to change. And I think for the positive. And I think you even saw that in the Roman Empire to some degree, where there was a lot of positive shifts. But I think at the same time, people see that genuine revival and positive shift, and there's going to be bad people that just want that power for themselves, and they're going to take that and try and wield it for their own purposes, which I think is what we're seeing with a lot of these so-called Christian nationalists. They're kind of doing the same thing over again. So, yeah.
But there is still some level of reality to kinship and to the variation in humanity. So there was an experiment where Libya adopted word for word almost the United States Constitution, and it worked out completely differently than our version of it. There is something that through the process of through the march of ages, through the march of history, through the European Enlightenment building upon itself and going through different struggles and I guess pressuring society and inspiring society to go within a certain bandwidth that I think was biblical, or at least came from discussions within biblical circles. It kind of produced a people that could perform or could act out this Constitution in such a way that it didn't devolve. Well, I mean, you'd have to look at history because I think it's constantly devolving into power games. I mean, within 20 years, they had to basically put the Constitution in quotes, and kind of the government did what the government needed to do in order for governments to operate. With Jefferson making the first iteration of the deep state, the national banks, centralizing power, and that whole process of how power actually operates. But when we get to a place, I don't totally agree with the kinship thing, but there is something that's kind of real about different groups having different values, having different behavioral patterns in aggregate. I don't think that they have different human values from God's point of view, but they do have different behavioral tendencies, and there will be friction if those people are put into close quarters with each other. So there has to be some sort of authority that creates harmony between people. I think it's not possible for America to go mono. There's no way for us to get back to where we are. So, but there is a sense where white identity has been watered down so much and then assaulted so much that it would seem kind of natural that a certain amount of people are saying, no, it's fine to be white. It's okay to be white. And actually it's great to be white, and kind of putting more weight on their white identity than they would have if it didn't come under assault. So I'm wondering how to thread that needle and how to have conversations around that to diffuse the worst aspects of that racialism or kinshipism.
Yeah.
While still acknowledging that level of identity does have salience on some level, or maybe you don't think that it does, which I'm open to hearing.
I don't think that your race, or I know there's probably been so many, I'm not super educated on the biology of race or DNA or these things necessarily, but I think I don't think it has as much to do with it as it does cultural, a history of cultural degeneracy, and really that stems from religious degeneracy. So even like countries like Libya, I mean, they've compared to us, they've had many generations of cultural degeneracy that was completely divorced from any sort of Western or Christian ethos. And so they're like, it's like we're starting on third base, they're starting at the pitcher's mound, and they're still hitting. Okay. You know what I mean? And so it's even there was somebody that mentioned that, maybe it was Ben Shapiro, I think, actually mentioned that to Bill Maher, because Bill Maher was talking about something in relation to him being an atheist, and I have the same, I kind of live like a Christian. I'm kind of a decent person. I don't steal or murder or any of this crazy stuff. And I'm like a civilized member of society. And Ben Shapiro kind of made that point. Well, you started on third base. Yeah. And it's this lineage, this long history of Christian. I don't know if that makes sense.
Momentum. The momentum is driving it along. And so you can disregard that or take it for granted or take it as granted.
So it's not like a lot of these kinetics, they'll look at Western civilization, they'll look at Europe, they'll look at the United States, and they'll see predominantly white for the race. And then they'll assume that the reason we're in the spot we are has something to do with that race, rather than the long lineage of actually adopting a biblical precedent for why we do what we do and how we live. So I think it just has more to do with race than it has to do, or I think it has more to do with religion than it has to do with race, to put it very simply. And you're right. If you just kind of hand the Constitution to, Nigeria right now.
Japan did fine.
Or other countries that haven't really adopted the same principles and the same, it's not going to translate. But
there's a leftist, I could hear a leftist critique of like cultural imperialism. Are you going to impose your culture on people? And are you going to, require that culture? And you see the right, or the people that you're contending with on the right say, yes, we will impose that. It seems like you're trying to find a middle path. So I want to kind of explore the where you're willing to compromise, or how you're going to reach all these different kinds of people.
I think it's funny because the people that are saying you shouldn't impose your culture are imposing their culture by even stating that.
Don't tell them that.
So
Actually, they know full well.
they know
They
full
know.
well. Yeah, they know they're doing it. It's the same people that say you can't legislate morality. Yeah, you
Respect my pronouns or else.
even a traffic like even a red light, a stop sign is, you could argue, that's imposing morality, a law
Yeah.
like that.
Mhm.
Because at the foundation of that is the value of human life. And so
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
it's just a nonsense thing to say, where like you're not imposing culture, you're not imposing morality, you're going to do that.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of which one are you going to impose and what is that going to look like.
Yeah.
So and I think the Christian one, obviously I'm a Christian, so I believe the Christian one is the best one. I think history kind of bears that out. If you look at Western civilization, we've had the most prosperous, prosperous and ordered yet free society in the history of the world. And I think that is fundamentally because of biblical values, imperfectly so, but
Well,
being
because our
imposed.
what we want to do, aka freedom, overlaps what we're allowed to do. Like what we want to do overlaps with what
Yeah.
what the law doesn't say you can't do.
Yeah. Like freedom isn't just do whatever you want. I think a lot of leftists kind of assume that that's what that means. And so
Mm-hmm.
they just it's just like this free for all, you can do whatever. But even they don't believe that, right? Because as soon as someone disobeys their secular moral law, then they
Mm-hmm.
have a temper tantrum about it. So even them, they think, so it's just completely contradictory. It
Yeah.
just proves it's not a matter of which moral law is going to be imposed. Or it's not a matter of if one is going to be imposed, it's which one. Um, and so then the question is, okay, if it were a Christian one, what would that actually look like?
Yeah.
And I don't, that's the tough one I think the big debate that's happening in the Christian world, particularly right now, at least the political Christian world, is like, what will that actually look like? At what extent can the government go to enforcing religion? And this goes back to these biblical arguments of, does the Bible prescribe the government to impose the first table of the law, which is like our relationship between God, the vertical law, and then there's the horizontal law, which is our relationship between others. And then if it is just the second, what does that look like? Like, how far can they go? And I think that the Bible isn't necessarily an explicit roadmap on that, as far as, enforce these laws and don't enforce these laws. But I think there's a lot of biblical principles that you can extract um, that would kind of determine how far you would allow the government to go on certain things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like, especially with like forcing people to go to church, for example. A lot of these people think if we just force people's butts into pews at
Yeah.
government mandate, then they'll eventually become Christian and then everything will be wonderful and we'll live in this Christian utopia. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that's how that works. Again, I think that that'll create rebellion against God. I think that will, I mean, we've even seen, so I'm familiar with a lot of like very fundamentalist Christian circles, and the amount of stories I've heard from people who grow up in those circles and they just completely go off, they turn into trans, furry, crazy, leftist, Marxist, all the way. I've heard countless stories. I know a bunch of people like that. And so
Yeah.
I think if Webbin's Christian nationalism, will say, gets its way, that's what we would see in mass in this country. Um,
Create a lot of rebellion.
it would create a lot of
Spiritual.
chaos, a lot of spiritual rebellion. It would
Yeah.
have the complete reverse effect, is my theory. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think that there's like limiting principles as far as to what the government would. Again, I hold to that second table of the law only. I don't think the government has not only the authority but the ability to dictate your relationship with God. Like, this whole idea of freedom of conscience is a very Christian idea, and this is fundamentally where this idea of religious liberty comes from. It's this freedom of conscience. You can't force someone to believe. I mean, under Webbin's Christian nationalism, you could have the government put a gun to your head and say, recite the Nicene Creed, right? But does that mean you actually, and you might do it. You might get thousands of people, millions of people doing that. But what does that mean? They actually believe that?
Mm-hmm.
No. It's like the George Orwell, it's 2 + 2 is 5 situation. It's
Yeah.
not that you actually believe that it's 5. You're being forced to orate that it's 5.
Yeah.
And what good does that do? I don't think that does any good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Christianity, in its fundamental nature, has never been a religion of coercion. Even though there's been sects of Christianity, you can look at the Roman Catholic Empire in the Middle Ages, for example, that have kind of turned it into that, and I think falsely. But it's at its fundamental nature, biblically speaking, it's never been about coercion. Quite the opposite. So
Mm-hmm.
that tweet that you commented on, I'm more interested in making I'm less interested in making America Christian and more interested in making Americans Christian. Is I think that's I think the key of what a lot of these so-called Christian nationalists are missing. Like, okay, you want a Christian nation, great, me too. What does that look like, and how do we get there? We need Christians, actual Christians, in order for that to happen. Because when people become Christians, it orders their entire life in a different way. You want to obey what the Bible says. You want to obey Jesus in your personal life, with your family, with your friends, with your work, but also with your politics. It's going to bleed over into everything. It's a holistic worldview. And if we want people in Christian, or people in government that are Christian, legislating in a Christian way, writing laws that honor God, then we're going to have people that are real Christians, that actually love God, that actually have an affection for God. And that's not the easy path. That's going to take time.
It's like I don't know, homosexuality is kind of a gray area, but abortion is also a gray area. I understand, without getting into the pro or against that, legislating it, if you have to legislate it, it's already a little too far. It's already a little too long. There's certain domains of behavior that are culturally enforced. And if the law has to get involved, one, it's going to make a mess of things, and two, it's going to waste so many resources on policing behavior that it's just, I was talking to my cousin-in-law. He's spent a lot of time in China, and we were talking about the history of China and kind of how it's changed over the last 50 years, from communism to kind of this other thing that's got a lot of capitalist bells and whistles, but it's still authoritarian. And I brought up that social credit score that they had, where they would really police your behavior, and you'd get better credit, and you'd get access to travel by behaving in a certain way, probably more monetarily, but also with your expressed belief, pro or con the Communist Party, the CCP. And what happened, it was a bureaucrat's idea, like, we'll just mandate this stuff, and we'll reward people who are our friends and punish people who are our enemies. And what happened immediately was that people started gaming the system and using social media to say, I love the CCP, it's the best thing ever, So they quickly realized that there's no way people are gamifying this level of behavior. So if you did make a Christian nationalism, it's the same aspect with a lot of the progressive overreach, progressivism, especially in schools, all these really hyper progressive teachers. There are a number of radicals, but most people just kind of go along and put the flags up and do the little things just because they just kind of go along, and that's the prevailing order of the day. And they are, ironically enough, being conservative, and that they just adopt the values, and then they just act out the values, and they don't rock the boat. So if it was Christian, one would suppose that it would probably be better, at least with regards to children's body parts, than whatever it is now, and probably center heterosexual relationships, and actually not just center them, but facilitate them, like have it built in that sex education is actually about the relationship. Like, the meaning of sex is reintroduced into the sexual education, which right now it's just like, here's a dildo, here's not to get a ruptured anus, but you're going to do whatever you need to do. But rather, what is the purpose of sex? If the purpose of sex is within a relationship, then how do you have a harmonious relationship? And then sex has meaning, but then you actually talk about the actual hard work of a relationship, just like the hard work of Christianity. It's like, well, how do you get along with somebody who's different than you? And how do you really become a harmonious part of a relationship?
That's actually a good example. The whole like sexual perversion of our culture, especially with young kids. I think that's a good example of like, it's like, yes, you need to tell, like, especially with a lot of the indoctrination, it's like, yeah, it's true that, what the progressives are doing is wrong and it needs to be stopped. But how do you actually reverse that problem? Is it just legislating laws that say, don't do that? You have to, it's almost like you have to reteach basic principles to people about what is a relationship, what is marriage, what is like, this is what's missing. And I think that's the hard work of them. That's the distinction between making America Christian and making Americans Christian. The Americans, those two letters at the end there, are that. It's like reteaching the original ideas back to people, which is going to take a lot of time. Oh, go ahead.
I would follow that up from, if Christians or if Christianity wants to reach people in this moment when people are interested in it, it can promise that we can teach you how to have better relationships. Right. So you start with these big concepts like meaning, and the problem that people have with Christianity is like it tells you what to do. It tells you what's bad and what's good, and people don't want to do.
People don't want to submit to that.
We don't want that. But
welcome to the Garden of Eden.
But the pitch is actually, this is if you live in accordance with God's laws, and we have data on this. I don't know, maybe there isn't data on this, but it's not just meaning in an abstract sense, but it's embeddedness in recognizing your humanity, the positives and the negatives of it, and then working around how to extrapolate the gospel, extrapolate the Bible into a good, rich, fulfilling, prosperous life. So the purpose of Christianity, it'd be a great tack-on effect. Maybe you'd like a Christian nation. But your attitude seems to be, but how would that even be if nobody's actually Christian? We just have a Christian nation. Like that's actually a perversion of Christianity.
Right.
Probably not as bad as what we have now, but less than ideal from what you want. Yeah.
So like, I think that to summarize what I think the role of, and this is way oversimplification, but to summarize what I think the role of the government is, it's kind of, Romans 13 is a famous passage that people turn to. It kind of summarizes it in just a snapshot of like, punish the guilty, reward the good. It talks about the government being God's avenger for justice, essentially. And I think that's where the role is. Like, in other words, the government isn't the church. It's not to mandate some theological dogma that everyone must believe, because then who decides which is the correct one? There's hundreds of different, even just Protestant denominations. And there's tons of disagreement even in the Catholic world, which is funny because they like to say they're all one cohesive body, but they're not.
Well, that's what they mean by Catholic.
Yeah. And so in that argument, the Catholics or the Protestants are almost more Catholic under the technical definition of the word Catholic.
Always happens.
That's a whole other thing. But so who gets to define what that is? It becomes a huge mess. And so I think, again, there's these like foundational, obvious principles of what is good and what is evil, that even non-Christians understand. This is why I think a lot of people, they'll refer to it as natural law. But I think that's really the concept of where the Bible prescribes government's role. It's enforcing natural law. And I think that's most obviously and maybe succinctly found in the Ten Commandments, the second half of the Ten Commandments. So, you don't have to be a Christian to understand that like going around and murdering your neighbors is probably a bad thing, and the government should probably step in and do something about that.
Yeah.
Or, going and stealing your neighbor's property is probably a bad thing, and the government should probably do something about that. Like, these are pretty obvious things. And, but again, my big critique with a lot of these so-called Christian nationalists isn't that they're arguing against that. It's just they take it to a place that goes far beyond those things, to where I think is actually counterproductive. So it's not a matter of, do I think Christian nationalism, I guess you could say, depending how you define it, do I think that's a bad thing? I think that's a good thing when properly defined, but it's just a matter of what does that actually mean? And what does it actually look like when it's played out?
Yeah.
So, and I think a lot of the places they want to take it in order to enforce that, especially in the United States, like the kinism stuff, for example, that would be so unbelievably barbaric what you'd have to do to people to where it's like, okay, would that be just at that point?
Yeah.
Let's just give them and say, even if that's true, the kinism stuff they're saying, going about and enforcing that would be so unbelievably barbaric. It would almost zap any justice that would be found in that, speaking of the United States. So I don't see that as a tenable or even realistic thing.
Well, I agree. But let me try to venture into a challenge.
Yeah.
If liberalism is too weak to protect a Christian nation from a thicker, stronger religion such as Islam, and we can see that, especially in the UK and more in America, these Islamic enclaves are enforcing their own law. There are Sharia courts within Britain where they enforce law, and the British government's kind of too weak
Just letting
to
them do
enforce,
it.
and kind of
Yeah.
letting them do it under the guise of, tolerance. Wouldn't you expect a stronger form of Christianity to arise to exert its own sovereignty and to repel Islam, which is not compatible with its values? And how would that play out? And would you be willing to throw in your lot with people who are stronger in their convictions, or would even agitate for a stronger enforcement of Christianity if it repelled, I don't know, or enforced a Christian moral standard as expressed through liberalism and disallowed Islamic regimes from sprouting up and basically claiming
I think
America,
it depends
taking over
on
America?
who that would be. So people just overtly toting Nazi, trying to rehabilitate Adolf Hitler, people like Jake Shields or Myron Gaines or these people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think what they would propose as a solution would be any better than what the Islamists are trying to
Sharia
do.
law. That's fair enough. Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's like, that would be my critique. And this is my critique
Yeah.
with Matt Walsh, because he's kind of like, he's not, he's just, at this point, he's just like, hey, let's just link arms with these people because they're right wing. It's just anything that's right wing is good. And I don't think that's true. I think there's certain factions of the right that are equally as bad. And, it's just replacing one poison with another at that point. And it's like, okay, but to your point, would I side with people who are maybe even a little bit more conservative and hardline? I don't know, even maybe, which there's probably people that would disagree with me on this, but even someone like Doug Wilson, if it meant staving off this threats like that, I think to some degree, yes. But we'd have to get really specific about what we're talking about, and to what degree. And
I guess part of the problem with what's been happening in the last couple of weeks, I guess the last week on Twitter. So Charlie Kirk gets assassinated, and we see the left dance on his grave before his body's cold, publicly. Time goes on, we kind of reel from that. There's no riots. We're not burning. The right is not burning down cities. It's, but it is becoming more aware of the what time it is, so to speak. And somebody like Matt, who's in the same position as Charlie Kirk is, there are people who would celebrate him dying and would take any given chance, or at least agitate for the right type of mentally unstable person to do that deed. Matt, seeing that in very stark contrast, would say, okay, no enemies to my right. Because at this point in time, we need to be on board to stop this murderous force that is obviously murderous. It's not just causing division. And if you look at his filmography, he did 2 movies so far that I'm aware of, Am I Racist? And What is a Woman? What is a Woman very cleverly takes down the trans cult. But the trans cult is real, and you see an uptick in accomplished political violence from people who identify among that. But the trans cult is infecting the minds of youth and poisoning, like literally putting the wrong hormones into their bodies and then modifying their bodies. And then the racist thing or racialism thing is destroying American solidarity by reasserting this kinship-based destruction of our social fabric. So him seeing those threats and very cleverly in a kind of in a centrist way, or like in a way that appeals to the normies, kind of taking down these things, engaging with these things, and the pushback to him is, well, he's a fascist, we got to kill him. He's a fascist, we got to kill him. Now, sorry, I'm kind of losing my thread, but let me bring it back.
I get what you're saying.
So then there is a political movement because of Trump, for whatever reason. Trump's big tent guy very American in a particular way, actually rather 90s liberal, not really a fascist at all. I mean, he's got a big ego, and so you can say that there's some sort of
In
fascistic
many ways,
aesthetic in
he's
him.
kind of Bill Clinton with weirder hair.
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah. Well, and
but
kind of sharper tongue,
yeah.
but there's a huge momentum for the right for America to reclaim its identity from a different path than it was going down. And that's taking a ton of effort and a lot of involvement from a lot of different people to affect that. And a lot of those people use a lot of different memes and means to develop different signals and to play around with different ideas. So this Politico article comes out about a week ago that goes through some young Republicans' DMs and group chats. And it looks like they're being a little fast and loose with certain jokes around the Holocaust and Hitler. And if you look at them, I haven't read every single message, but it looks like they're obviously joking and they're obviously not agitating for gas chambers. They're just kind of being edgy. But that is used suddenly, or for whatever reason, it causes the right to stumble and to divide itself and to expend a lot of energy on breaking itself from being collectively unified in order to achieve any sort of ends. Because people are so worried about the right, among the right, that before they even get anywhere, they're going to tear each other apart. So I understand the tug of war that you're bringing up with people who you see as enemies to the Christian worldview or the Christian way of life, because they're just too far, or they're accentuating the wrong thing. But if the right doesn't get anywhere, there's no way it can go too far. So, I mean, how do you politically keep the eyes on the prize without getting stifled and giving the left everything that it wants?
So that's a great question. So I think and I would say that partnering with the radical factions that are, I mean, just overtly at this point trying to rehabilitate and, put a positive spin on Adolf Hitler and a lot of those ideas or other things. Some of them are now, this is just as ridiculous to me as Queers for Palestine. You see a lot of these people now like running, carrying water for Sharia law or certain Islamic ideals. And I think that has less to do with the fact that they are Muslims and more that they kind of aspire to that level of authoritarianism and control over a population. And you kind of see them fawning over that, or feudalism and other things like that. I've seen that so many different times on Twitter. And so as far as the Politico story goes, I think that when people say that was a leftist hit piece to try and make conservatives look crazy, I mean, it's the same thing the left has been doing for years, where they want to assign conservatives at large, even if you're just like you're an 80-year-old grandma sitting at home watching Sean Hannity, and you just don't want to see kids turn into, psychopaths, and you don't want to see kids' genitals mutilated or anything. You're a Nazi. That's what the left says. You 80-year-old, kind, sweet old granny watching Sean Hannity in your living room at night. You're a Nazi. And that's what CNN is telling people. That's what, like institutionalized narratives about conservatives. We're all familiar with that at this point. And so I think the political story is just another attempt at that in a way. The problem I'm seeing now is not that people are saying that, but the fact that this is giving people an excuse to ignore the actual ways in which the right's gone too far. And so I think that the right, in many of these factions, they have gone too far, just like the left can go too far, we can go too far. And
too far how?
Like too far into the authoritarian camp, where I know some people talk about horseshoe theory, where there's like the political theory and the far left and the far right kind of merge together at the corners. I think we see that a lot in the political spectrum right now, and you're seeing how that kind of happens, I think. And I don't think that embracing a hard right, Nazi adjacent political philosophy is any better than what the left is offering us. I think it's in many ways the same thing, or at least lead to the same thing.
Which
And
is micromanaging,
micromanagement,
totalitarian.
collectivism, like the individual, like kind of what I was saying before. One of the primary ideals of the American experiment and the constitutional order comes from this idea that people are individuals and each individual has innate God-given value. And so this is the problem with these collectivist ideologies, is it kind of erases the individual. Now you are just kind of a subset of the group that you represent, and you'll be treated as that. You'll be treated as whatever that is. And whatever the collective group assigns your smaller group as, if you're that smaller group, well, you're just kind of that. And you, like, this is what they're doing with Jews right now in certain factions of the right, where there's this mass skepticism of Jew. And I have no problem with people criticizing the Israeli government. I don't really care about the Israeli government personally. I don't really care about Benjamin Netanyahu or any of this. What I care about is, and this is what I've been trying to speak up about, is when we take problems with the Israeli government and then we say, hey, this is somehow representative of all people that are Jewish, whether it's ethnically speaking or even religiously.
Well, it doesn't help that the Israeli government is more than happy to construe any criticism of it as anti-Semitism. So
yeah, well, there's that too. And I think that's dishonest too. So it's like you see this, it's this tug of war.
Yeah.
And so, but point I'm making is, like, I don't think embracing a radical faction of our party to the point where, I mean, this is what happened on the left. They embraced the radical faction of their party, and within no time, the radical faction of that party completely eclipsed anything else, to the point where any sane person, and there's many of these people that were once on the left, have walked away and kind of found themselves as a result more on the right, because they've gone so far left. And many of those people didn't actually change what they believe. Their party abandoned them for the radicals. And I could foresee that happening on the right, to where we actually would end up, I think, losing politically in the long term. Like, we would just become the very thing the left has been falsely accusing us of, and now that just makes the left look honest. So it's super challenging, because I get what you're saying, where it's like the left is a real imminent threat, and conservatives need to find a way to unite together in order to defeat that left, because they do have, at least they have had for a long time. I think now we're seeing that start to change a little bit. I think for good. Not for good meaning it's going to stay that way, but it's a good thing. I think they did have institutional power, speaking of the left, for decades. They've had this Hollywood, media, entertainment, in government, whatever it is. And rightfully so, a lot of conservatives have felt beat down. We felt betrayed by our institutions that we're supposed to trust and depend on for many things. We felt scapegoated as like the problem in society, especially younger white men, where, like, if you go to university now, you're essentially told, I had this experience when I went to public university for a little bit, where I was just told, you're the problem. You're a Christian. You're a white straight man. You're like the evil cultural hegemony, and you're the oppressor, essentially, is this narrative we've been told. And I think people have had enough of that. And I understand it. I've had enough of that. Like, I'm with them with that. But the problem is, we can't let that frustration and that anger, like, allow our brain to fall out to where we just start embracing the same type of destructive collectivism on the other side. That's going to lead us nowhere good. And I think, just pragmatically speaking, it's just going to give the left electoral victory like we've never seen, at least like we haven't seen in a while in the upcoming elections. Because again, it just makes them look honest. And if the left has been calling us Nazis and we become Nazis, to stick it to them, how does that solve a problem? I don't think it does.
Yeah.
So
my only nuanced interjection is that, following Jonathan Peugeot's conceptualization of the post-World War II order kind of getting long in the tooth and disintegrating because it doesn't have meaning, the boomers, it has captured the imagination of the boomers, and their worldview is that it's commies versus fascism, and then there's us, even though we kind of sided with the commies. But we don't, we overlook that. But then communist ideology and symbolism is allowed, whereas Nazi symbolism is not allowed. And what communism kind of means on a structural, ideological, or mythological level is in its best form everybody is human, everybody's equal, and we need to go through the process of equalizing everybody as far as possible. And what fascism on a narrative level means is that any sort of group collective identity is inherently evil, especially for Europeans, especially for Christians, especially for the dominant.
It's like radical hierarchy. Yeah.
Yeah.
In a
So
sense. Yeah.
so what I see with what Kanye's song and a lot of the joking around Hitler and the Nazis, specifically the joking, is that it's a way to disintegrate that stuckness that we have around envisioning any sort of national identity for Europeans as inherently evil and should be counterposed by this, by what? Either communism or this kind of liberalism, which in effect turns into a bureaucratized, like if you look at the civil rights movement, it started as, a push to end suffering and to end identity-based suffering, but in law it became the disintegration of freedom of association, the disintegration of freedom of speech, the disintegration of freedom of consciousness or conscience in the pursuit of racial equality, which then leads the way to racial equity. So what I see to a certain degree, and I don't know to what degree is true and what degree is not true, and so I understand when I make this argument on Twitter that people some people are prone to put me into the radical camp or into apologizing for the radical camp, but I do think that there's a certain sort of mimetic breaking down of the post-World War II story in order for us to see where we are right now. And Hitler, to a certain degree, is representative of a national identity and to a people that want to organize and live a life that is suitable to their history and to their sense of identity. And to a certain degree, there is some sort of collectivism that is necessary, even in liberalism. We have to vote. We're constantly participating in the marketplace, either of ideas or of the dollar. There is some sort of collective action constantly. Christianity is a collectivism. It might be the closest collectivism that human beings can attain if they work their asses off and constantly pursue that what you were talking about a closeness and adoration of the higher God. So
right.
What I'm trying to navigate or trying to understand, and I really appreciate you talking to me because I have been talking with people who are at the edge of the Overton window, and you're solidly in the Overton window.
I make a lot of people mad for this reason. I feel like both camps kind of try to pigeonhole me into something I'm not. Like the far right will try and pigeonhole me into being a commie
or a
just
Jew
full
or
on
whatever,
leftist, and then
whatever
the
bad
other
word
side
that
will
they can
call me a Nazi, and I'm like, okay. I hear it all, but I'm sorry, keep going.
No, there's a way to understand the process by which national identity suits us, that a tribal identity suits us, and that if it's too thick, it's going to go off the rails. If it's too thin, it's going to get taken over. So there's a lot of people agitating for a stronger identity and probably pushing too far on that or overemphasizing it too far. But it seems like if we don't answer that question about where do I begin and the collective ends, if we don't really put into place in a hierarchy of identities, my identity as an individual, my identity as a family man, as a community member, as a voter, as somebody who in a different historical timeline would have given my life for the country, and maybe I'll be called upon to do that. But at some level, like my European identity is something to be cherished and to adore, to be adored and to be passed on. That doesn't mean I have to hate anybody else. That's the trick. This is the trick. It doesn't have to become toxic, but if it's repressed and automatically called toxic, then it's going to fester even more. So I'm trying to see where these guys are right and where they're wrong.
I think you're right, where there's always like a chunk of truth in every lie. Yeah. And I think the part that you're highlighting here is the truth aspect of where they're at, where it's almost what I see with, at least with some of these guys, again, specifically talking about the people that are joking with the Hitler stuff. I think it's like this teenage angst, almost like they're rebelling against their parents or a system that's no longer seemingly serving them. So
Yeah.
they're at the, you know, they're being crushed by academia, they're being crushed by
Housing prices.
taxes, housing, you go down the
Yeah.
list. And I understand that. I'm 30 years old and I'm experiencing that stuff too. And
Yeah.
so I understand the angst and the frustration and the anger that come with that. And I think doing the Hitler kind of meme stuff or the joking, like in that group chat, I think is like a way to express, it's like a middle finger to that. And I think I understand that, but I think it's like a childish response
Okay.
that's not going to lead to a solution. It's not like it's not a solution. It's just expressing the anger that they feel towards the system that's no longer serving them or that's abandoned them in many ways, which is a real thing that's happened, I think.
Yeah.
And so I think to reach these people, and I've tried to do a lot of thinking on this, like, okay, how do you reach the person who is like playing footsie with Hitler at this point, like the young dude who's just, working some factory job, who's frustrated, who got, essentially bullied out of academia because he's a white straight man, which there's many of those, there's many cases. How do you reach that person, and how do you, you know, ward him off of going off, ward him from going off of the Hitler cliff where, again, I think it's a spiritual problem at the end of the day. I think that, I mean, even, and I hate to sound like overly spiritual, and maybe this isn't the answer people want, but I mean, I always think about, the early church and the oppression that they were facing, where they were being flogged by Roman authorities for being Christians, and they were being tortured and beaten and thrown into prison and having their houses taken from them, and all, like, the worst kind of persecution you could possibly think of was happening to these people on a regular basis for the first couple hundred years of the church consistently. And yet, what was their response largely? And I think this is why Christianity was so captivating to so many people and why it spread so quickly. It wasn't F Caesar. It wasn't let's start a political revolution. It was, okay, we're going to stay on mission and we're going to continue to preach the gospel and we're going to remain faithful to what the Bible says, no matter what happens. And that was where their identity was rooted. So it wasn't rooted in Caesar. It was rooted in Christ.
Or anti-Caesar for that word.
Or anti-Caesar, which is, I think, the same thing. So the left roots their identity in Caesar, you could say, and their Caesar is this collectivist state religion. And then the right, the godless right, we'll call them, they root their identity in Caesar as well. And it's more of like a more hard right, monarchy or whatever it might be. Like people like Jack Posobiec are calling for an American Franco. And it's this longing for identity that is, I think, misplaced, is at the end of the day what it is. And I think the best thing Christians can do right now in the political sphere is to call people to an identity in Christ that is separate and not it's not tied to whoever's in authority over us, speaking of the governing authorities. Like Christ himself promises that we're going to face persecution and the world is going to hate you. If they hated me, they're going to hate you. And so I don't know what else we're expecting here. So it's like business as usual. And I think people forget that for Christians. Like, we've become so tied to comfort and in the American, and I thank God for that. Thank God that we've had so many years of comfort and prosperity and all this stuff. But that's not the norm throughout history. And I think we're starting to experience a little bit of the norm, the historical norm in this country, and people are losing their minds over it. And I get it. I get why. But again, I think it's just misplaced identity. And so that frustrated young man who's working in a factory, barely making ends meet, can't buy a house because the housing market got kicked out of academia or bullied out because he was pitched as the culture hegemony by the left, whatever it might be. The best thing you can give that guy is an identity rooted in Christ, not in some abstract religious structure or some form of Caesar. I think that's a huge mistake. And so this is a big thing I've been trying to push back against with the woke right or the alt-right. People have so many different names for it. I don't even know what the correct name for it is anymore. But the far right, we'll just say that. And I think a lot of the solutions, again, that are being offered by these people is just so divorced from that, while they're also claiming to be the ones that are championing Christendom and Christian nationalism, all this stuff. I'm like, okay, I'm with you in that, I guess, in theory, but like, let's root our identity in the first half of the phrase. and at least start there. Let's at
Yeah.
least start there. It's like we're wanting to skip over the Christian part and just get right to the nationalism part. I'm like, those things, you can't separate those things.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to end up in another Third Reich, which is exactly what they did, where it started as like this Christian, we're going to bring back positive Christianity, as it was called. There's like the Deutsch Christian movement, which is essentially it was essentially people doing exactly what these people are doing now, and presented these types of this type of political philosophy, in Christian language, so that Anglo-Saxon, German, generally Christian population would adopt. And obviously, we saw the result. It was anything but Christian at the end of the day. So I'm worried that if the right goes too far and does adopt this stuff, it's going to end up in something like that. And I don't think the right's going to get institutional power to where they could do something like that in this country. But I think them doing that will make so many people go back to the left. It'll be crazy. That's my prediction. I could be wrong, but
yeah,
that's kind of where I'm at with
dialectic on somewhere like that.
Yeah.
We do have to, I mean, all due respect to the Germans, but they do tend to take things too far, just as...
I live in Wisconsin, so there's plenty of Germans here. So
okay, yeah,
they definitely do. No.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Mikale,
you're right.
Thank you so much for joining me and helping me suss these things out and to listen to your point of view, which I've been kind of agitating against because for my own reasons that I'll get into or that I've gotten into elsewhere. But I really appreciate you kind of fleshing out your point of view, and it does speak to me, and it's kind of like the reality really aligns to the reality that I see of what's necessary and needed in this moment. Where can people find you, and what are they going to find when they get there?
So Twitter at real Mick Olson. I realized I forgot to put this on Zoom. I'm just on my phone.
No, I would erase it anyways. I hate those.
But real Mick Olson, MIKOLSON on Twitter. And then I'm the same handle on YouTube, just Mikale Olson. If you Google my name, you'll see my Christian Post articles and things like that I've written as well. Yeah, and then on my Twitter, I have my link tree, and there's everything under there that I've done. Yeah. So
what are you doing on YouTube? What are you working on?
Just political commentary, stuff like this. Okay. So I've been interviewing different people. Last interview I did was with Karis Rea, if you know who she is. I haven't posted that interview yet. I'll be uploading that hopefully later today. Talking about some issues relating to Israel and things like that. But so it's been good. And then I've been just kind of doing sit down monologue videos as well lately. So it's been fun. But
just riffing.
Yeah, just riffing.
Cool. What do you do beyond being a talking head?
So I work kind of part-time with my brother. We do he works for this guy he owns this big property in Madison, and we'll help go do events over there, and I do videography and photography and things like that. And I've got other side projects. I'm working with this other company, kind of helping them with video editing and podcast editing and things like that. So it's a lot of video editing related stuff. That's mostly, I'd say, what I'm doing. So
do you have an ambition with regard to
I'd like to get to the point where, that's a great question. I'd like to get to the point where I'm a little bit more self-sustaining. So I also have been, working with Not the Bee. I was a more solidified with them maybe 2 months ago, where I was consistently writing articles kind of on a daily basis for them. And that's I've started doing just more op-eds for them. And that was more of a paid gig. And now it's kind of transitioned to less of that. So I'm trying to branch off into other things. And I would like to get to the point where I'm more self-sustaining. I'd like to start writing more, building up my Substack instead of sending it elsewhere for publication. YouTube, I'd like to be more self-sustained there. I haven't thought about this, which this would be way in the future probably, but I'd like to get to the point where maybe even starting some kind of smaller publication and having other authors contribute and things like that. I think that'd be awesome. But
you think you'll under a Christian kind of?
Yeah, everything I do is probably. I mean, I do a lot of political commentary, but it's kind of under the Christian. My commentary is speaking mostly to evangelical Christians.
Okay,
so that's my audience, I would say. So yeah,
and from that point of view.
That point of view, yeah. So
Do you think the revival's on the way? You think
I'm
the
hoping so. I'm hoping
yeah
it's not just like political hype,
yeah
just hyping, especially after the Charlie Kirk thing. Um, I'm hoping it's not just people excited about a direction the country's going politically or culturally, and I hope it's like a real
yeah
passion for, which I think there is a lot of genuine, right? Like the church I'm going to right now, it's been growing a lot. There's been a lot of new people coming in, even in the last month since the Charlie Kirk thing.
mm-hmm.
It's a church of about, I think, 700 people regularly. So it's a decent sized church.
Yeah.
And I think it was the 2 Sundays after the Charlie Kirk tragedy, we had over 400 new people each
Hmm.
service. And it's been kind of steady at that ever since then.
Wow.
So it's been, which is crazy. That's unbelievable growth. And I think it just
Yeah.
shows people are genuinely hungry for
It's a
something
lot of
more.
work.
So
Just a lot of
it's a lot
discipleship.
of work, a lot of work. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I got going on. But
Oh, great.
yeah,
Great. Well, it's great to meet you and get to know you in
yeah,
this format.
this has been great. So thanks for
Yeah.
having me on.
Absolutely. My pleasure. I'll
Yep.
link to your work down there in the description.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good
We'll
one.
see you.
Bye. Cool, man.